So good evening and welcome to tonight's Cabinet meeting. It's the 18th of June. We have a busy agenda ahead of us. So first of all, can we take, before we do, apologies, can I welcome Councillor Joe Harvey, who is a new member of our Cabinet for tonight. Welcome, Joe, to your first meeting joining Cabinet. Tony, have we got some apologies for this evening?
Chair, I assume we've got an apology from Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you very much. That's duly noted. So we had our last meeting on the 22nd of May. You've had a copy of the minutes from that meeting. Is everybody content for me to sign them, or does anybody have any comments or questions before I ask you for an approval? So no comments and questions. Do I have an approval, please, to sign those as a true record of the meeting? Thank you very much. I shall put a paw print on this. Well, I will if my pen will work. Okay, thank you very much, Tony. That's brilliant. Oh, and I've got to initial it as well. Thank you very much. Then we move to item 3, which is members' interest. Does anybody have a declaration as to a disclosable pecuniary or other registrable or non-registrable interest? No. Okay, so that's noted as none. That moves us then on to item 3, which is the community infrastructure levy governance review, which I know has been keenly awaited. Councillor, I'm having a whole moment, Tom. Councillor Sanderson, would you like to take us through this item, please?
I certainly will, Chair. Thank you very much. So really the purpose of this report is to set out the first stage of a new community infrastructure levy governance process regarding the prioritisation and spending of CIL collected by the Council. The report and associated appendix is the culmination of stage 1 of this work, and it considers a range of options and recommendations for a new governance approach that will align with current national and local planning legislation. And just to summarise, as you can see at page 9, the new governance will support the delivery of our current local plan up to 2036, the infrastructure delivery plan to fund infrastructure, the corporate plan 2023 to 28 across our 3 priorities, especially priority 2, which is of course creating a better Huntingdonshire for future generations, and also some of the other strategic strategies and policies such as Huntingdonshire Futures, Places Strategy, a climate strategy, market town investments, and healthy and open spaces. So the appendix, I'm sure members have read it, is very comprehensive. My thanks to Inner Circle, particularly Johnny from Inner Circle, as well as the implementation team at HDC for all their work on this. And just going through it, I think it's fair to say that CIL won't solve all of our problems, all of the financial things and infrastructure that we need in our district, but it will certainly go some way to doing that. I think the phrase that was used for our current governance is it's organised but it's inconsistent, and that's some of the feedback I've had from towns and parishes when they've applied, as well as some other stakeholders. We have a statement of intent, and if you look at section 5 in appendix 1, figures 4 and 5, they give the various options, and I'll come to the recommendation shortly. We also consider a number of other things, but I think it's important that the new infrastructure development programme is a pipeline for infrastructure. And we need to share this, I think, at an earlier stage with our town and parish councils and make that part of our training package with them as well. And I think at the moment there's a perception, there's perhaps more than a perception, that we're working separately. I think if we can utilise, and a lot of parishes that have neighbourhood plans, they get a 25% meaningful proportion of CIL. Work with them, I think, more closely, we can probably achieve a lot more. And I'll go further on because we had a number of comments from scrutiny. Well, actually, I'll deal with the recommendations first. And first of all, to agree the new CIL governance based on the statement of intent set out in the report in the appendix. Delegate authority to the corporate director of a place and the chief planning officer in consultation with the Executive Council for Planning to develop, publicise and implement the new governance arrangements. Delegate authority to the same to make changes to the documentation required under recommendation 2. To agree This is point 4, to agree the suggested increase in threshold for smaller funding applications from 50,000 to 100,000. At the moment, that is only at 50,000. Under this, request for SIL funding allocations over 100,000 will be subject to a decision by Cabinet. And again, delegate authority to the Chief Planning Officer to take forward steps to develop a programme to work more closely with towns and parish councils. Now, I was present at the scrutiny panel and presented the report. The feedback I thought was very lively, very interesting, and I will go through some of that now. So 4.2, Councillor Gardner, relating to rural areas, which we know is a passion of his. SIL, of course, is strategic, and the idea is this revised approach to SIL would allow for the meaningful proportions to go further. Councillor Pickering made a good point about the transparency. I think he was concerned that, again, with this perception that district were basically in charge of this and wouldn't be cooperative. I think we all assured Councillor Pickering that we want to be cooperative. We want to very much work with our partners on this, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing this. And some other comments. I think probably most controversially, if I can use that phrase, at 4.8, Councillor Martin proposed raising that threshold from 50 to 100,000. I think he was concerned about that and felt that wasn't perhaps the best approach. Councillor Corley asked to add an additional recommendation. I think the wording here is maybe not entirely correct. I've watched the meeting back a couple of times, and I have to say every time I watched it, I picked up new bits from the panel's comments. They were very thorough. I think what the panel actually was saying is that they thought that Cabinet should look at this, keep it at 50,000 for the moment, and then look at it in 12 months rather than what's expressed here. That was certainly my understanding of what they said, and happy to debate and discuss that as we progress this evening. I think one of the key things we need to do here as well is the training. We're having a training session with towns and parish councils soon. I think that obviously a lot of them are from rural areas. I know that's a concern for a lot of members, that they feel they may be excluded because they perhaps don't have the resources that some of the towns do. So I think perhaps we need to consider just how we can champion that and ensure that they are aware of the process, the new process. They have all the help they need in order to submit successful applications, and just ensure that we have that process clearly in place so we can work alongside each other. My own thoughts about raising the limit, keeping the limit at 50,000 as the panel expressed a wish to do. I think that we could be just generating more work for this. It is very strategic still. That's not to say that there are not a lot of worthy projects at that level. But I think given the problems we've had with inflation as well in particular, I don't think that 100,000 is particularly a large amount. And I think delegating that to officers may be preferable than having to then produce separate reports and taking that to scrutiny along with other more strategic projects. I'll pause there and happily take questions, and look forward to comments from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson, and I suspect we will have some debate on that because I suspect there will be different views in the room. You'd expect that. Can I just clarify that the going forward, SIL has always been about unlocking growth, so that still remains the key priority for what we're doing, and therefore one of the challenges I think in the last round was whether sometimes our applications really are unlocking growth in perhaps the way we envisage, or whether actually that process has unfolded in the way that we might reasonably expect. So you're already saying that one of the things we might want to be looking at is the training and support around those that are applying, so they're clear about the criteria and they're very clear about what they would need to provide in order to be able to demonstrate that they've met that criteria. So I think that's probably some quite helpful clarification, because we spent quite a long time at previous meetings and then in this meeting looking at some of those requests in quite a lot of detail. Okay, well, let's open it up. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson, for presenting that and feedback from scrutiny, and Councillor Conboy for that helpful context, which touches on what I was going to pick up as well. I think this is extremely timely. I think there's broad agreement, not just in this room, but beyond it, that our SIL arrangements are due time for an update. I think the approach set out here is extremely helpful, and I'm really pleased to support that. I think, as you've alluded to, Councillor Conboy, and reflecting on discussion that I saw at the panel and what's picked up in our paper, it is worth underlining, and was a reminder of the importance to continue underlining what SIL is and isn't. Specifically, it's not simply a fund that the council runs for bidding to build nice stuff in our communities, to put it like that, without reference to its role in unlocking future growth and development because of the particular legislative rules and rationale for SIL existing. So it clearly SIL can and does deliver that sort of thing, but it's not intended as a pot for bidding to without reference to the growth impact, and I think we do need to be clear about that. And as you say, Councillor Conboy, some recent applications underlined a departure from that recognition in some hopeful applicants. The other thing that SIL isn't is something that has an automaticity as to spend in the place it's been generated, and for reasons we can all understand, that is can be a motive in our communities as well. But SIL is about, as we say, development and growth rather than sort of compensation for what has already happened. And I think this report helps us focus on being more strategic and deliberate in how we're using SIL in order to support priorities. It gives us a path for doing that. Just on the specific of the recommendation that came from scrutiny, as well as you say, Tom, it's Councillor Sanderson, forgive me. I think on the face of it, it's a perfectly reasonable observation that 100,000 is a lot more than 50,000 because it's twice as much, and the aspiration for us to be considering applications in the political space as equating to transparency, I think, is a perfectly reasonable suggestion. As you say, though, what you can get for £50,000 now is a lot less, even more less in the construction sector than you could get for that a few years ago when the policy was the existing policy was last adjusted. Construction inflation has been wildly beyond even the pretty wild base levels of inflation across the economy overall, and the value to us of having the smaller elements is partly for speed and efficiency of decision making, but also for applicants. The SIL policy is intended to be applied correctly and fairly as it's set out, and it's right and proper that large, significant decisions come to us for political responsibility and decision making. But I think some of the arguments advanced in the committee in favour of retaining it at a lower figure, I think, assumed and suggested an assumption that actually SIL decisions are sort of subjective and arbitrary, and that it was automatically better to have elected members deciding on them, whereas in fact our role is to bring a political focus and responsibility to, as I say, large and strategic decision making. For me, the proposal is one that is sensible to consider, but on balance, I would retain the original recommendation of 100,000. But interested to hear colleagues' views.
Thank you, Chair. The question for the portfolio holder, really. So one of the objectives mentioned in the report, page 38 of the report or 58 of the agenda pack, talks about closer alignment with district and local priorities, and talks about, so specifically, engagement with town and parish councils. So I think the question about the threshold is about that kind of local engagement, but actually I think the engagement happens probably before the decision's made. It's about trying to make sure that we have, high quality projects brought forwards that actually respond to growth and respond to some of the other objectives that you outlined in the introduction. Can you give us an idea of where you see that direction of travel? What might that look like in future when we're engaging with town and parish councils?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very relevant one. I think one of the first things we need to do, as I said, is get all our towns and parishes in a room together as much as we possibly can, and just take them through the new process and make it clear that we're here to help, we're not here to work against. And I think one of the difficulties, as I said in my remarks, is that occasions we're working separately. We're saying, well, you've got your neighbourhood plan, you've got your meaningful proportion, you've got your 25% of SIL, so off you go, do your projects, and then we'll look at ours. I think if we ran them together, we could get a lot more value from what we're doing. So if we're looking at a road project, for example, and the town wanted some input into that, we're better to work together to achieve that. I'm thinking particularly when they draw up neighbourhood plans, and a lot of those plans, I think actually St Neots was the first to have a neighbourhood plan, that will need to be renewed. Do we need to think about putting things like active travel in that and working with them as they produce a neighbourhood plan, so they're able to use that, use their meaningful proportion alongside with what the county council are doing, for example. I mean, the last time this was updated was 2015. So it's long overdue, I think, and it's just, I think, become a little bit tired. I think we just need to, as well as update the policies, just update our way of working as well.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. I'll get the right name this time, Councillor Wakeford. Apologies. Does anybody else want to comment? Councillor Mickelberg?
I'm thinking back to our last SIL round, which had a call in, didn't it? And I'm thinking about the amounts or the conversation that was made about the amount going from 50 to 100,000. And I'm looking at the list of the SIL applications, and depending on whether or not you put the penny one side of the 100 or the other, half of them would have been dealt with by officers under the new proposed level. So I was in the room when the comments were made at scrutiny, and listening to the debate about how it all ties together, and hearing two sides to that argument around an element of concern around the transparency in the process, equally looking at the other side of that, which says, have we got a knowledge gap in terms of understanding as to what should be arriving from a SIL point of view, which is one part of the argument. The other is then we're putting in a new process, and a new process, it doesn't always necessarily go swimmingly first time round. So I think there was elements in the room around, how do we know we're getting this right? What does that look like? If we're not seeing, we're not testing some of these that are coming through, are we confident that that process is actually going to be robust? And we're not going to find ourselves in a situation we had with the last SIL round. So in essence, there are two questions there for the portfolio holder. One is around, is the root cause of elements of that problem around visibility due to training? And then the second part of the question is, how are we going to iterate this process? Once we've done a round, how are we going to say, this has worked well, this hasn't worked well? How do we give confidence to our colleagues in overview and scrutiny that actually we're feeding that back in, and it isn't just going to be a fait accompli that we drive through like a 50-ton truck?
Chair, I think that was a very similar point to the one that Councillor Pickering made. And I think he actually was probably a bit more blunt, but made a valid point that said, are we going to be perceived as being quite aloof as we go through this process? I think it's something we very much need to avoid doing. I think that the implementation team are very cooperative, but I can see, I sit on a parish council myself, as to quite a few of us in this room, and I can see sometimes the perception, it comes across that perhaps we're not getting that right in that area. So I think, as Councillor Mickelberg said, I think that is more a case of training and working with towns and parishes, but equally I think we've got to listen to their feedback, because they will point out things to us that aren't working. One of the practical things, digress slightly, is at the moment the template is not very user-friendly. So you can easily miss questions. Well, we just need to change that and make sure that you can't miss a question. You have to complete it before you can submit. I think actually Councillor Corney from Ramsey made a point that when he submitted on behalf of his parish council, he didn't actually know that it had been received. So just a couple of practical things we need to brush up on. I think in terms of going forward, I think that's a very good point. I think we do need to have an effective review next time we have a SIL round, which will be under this process, and get people to ask those difficult questions, because there will be things that don't go according to plan, that aren't right. So I think that's something we perhaps need to work on a bit more going forward, a process of capturing where things haven't worked and where they have. And as I said, I'm afraid people will come away disappointed because we can't do everything with it. And, I've been disappointed when my own parish hasn't been successful. I'm sure we all have. So it's important that we try and get the process as closely aligned to our infrastructure needs as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Any more comments? Okay, let's have Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Martin, I can see where he's coming from, but I have thought about this, and I've thought about this quite a lot. The increase, and we spoke about it tonight, is to do with inflation and construction costs. It will not deter any transparency. The transparency is still there. If a project 2015 to a year ago was priced at 50,000 and now the project is priced at 100,000, you are still getting the same project. It's not going to be a bigger project. You're not going to get more for your money. It's still going to be that same project. And the transparency is still there. In fact, if anything, with the new SIL governance, when you look at the recommendation of 6 to align local and strategic priorities and to work more closely with our towns and parishes, I think, that is a whole hog of improvement for this. So I think listening to the debate, I'm quite comfortable at keeping the recommendation at 100,000.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you. So I've spent quite a lot of the last 10 or 20 years applying for funds, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. It's great when you get the money. It's really annoying when you don't. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that's doubly annoying is when you don't really understand the reason why you haven't been successful. That's a real blow. And so I think a lot of this is about the general public, and particularly town and parish councils who will be submitting applications to this process, having kind of faith and trust in the process, that when they're not successful, they feel that they're not particularly surprised, because they hopefully understand that, sometimes you take a punt and see if you're lucky, and when you don't get the money, you think, well, okay, it was worth a go. But I think actually the 50 or 100,000 pound threshold is one of the less interesting parts of this document in a way for me. There's much more meat in this proposal. And I think the underlying nervousness around that threshold is about, is this a political decision? Is cabinet or delegated responsibilities, basically going off and making what should we say, a sort of a subjective decision about whether they like the application or not. And I think the whole process here is about locking that down, and basically the political job is to design the process So therefore, it kind of, the process plays out in a very transparent way. So what I'm building up to is actually, I don't think it's particularly important where the threshold is, because what I want to do is get to a point where people are satisfied that the decision's been made responsibly and properly, regardless of whether it's been delegated or comes to Cabinet and through ONS. So on that particular point, I'm kind of happy to go with the consensus. But what I hope is that we're on a process now, on a journey where people will really understand in advance what they need to put into their application, and then it will be assessed on its own merits, and people will kind of respect the decisions that are made wherever they end up getting made.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. I think that's a really helpful sort of, I feel we're kind of coming to a conclusion, but Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you. That was a very helpful summary from Councillor Pitt. And I think the other thing is, obviously everyone's time is limited, so members and officers, we all know that, Cabinet and scrutiny. So I think we've got to utilise the time we've got when we're looking at the more strategic projects. So it covers a lot of things, doesn't it? Transport, education, health, as we saw, I think, with Acklenbury Weald a year or so ago, education, One Leisure, and they have a huge impact on our local communities. So I think we do have to have that threshold. My personal view as well would be, I think it needs to be that 100,000. I could certainly see where the colleagues on scrutiny were coming from with that, and I've taken those comments on board, and I think it's important, particularly colleagues in rural areas, as I said at the start, who may feel that they're not going to get that same sort of opportunity as maybe some of the bigger towns and parishes or the bigger stakeholders like the health service. So it's important, I think, that we have that as part of our process going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Mickelberg.
I think Councillor Pitt is right in terms of the amount is less important than, again, coming back round and saying, well, here is version 1.0 of what we're doing. We've gone through a round. Actually, officers are going to put us onto a version 1.01, 1.02, because there was a spelling mistake, something in the process it can be improved. I think overview and scrutiny is concerned just is when are they going to be able to look at version 1.1? And I think if we can put in a firm, this is when we're going to come back round to report back to say, actually the process is working well, or here are the improvements, or what do you think should be there, I think that would alleviate the concerns that came through from that increased amount or decreased amount request.
Thank you, Councillor Mickelberg. Councillor Sanderson, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I think that's a good point from Councillor Mickelberg. We perhaps need a timetable of moving forward about when we report back to scrutiny. So after this, I'll be going back to the team and just saying, you know, it's important, I think, that we realise this is just one part of the journey that we're on with this. And we just need to, as well, I mean, perhaps a good time to do this, I haven't discussed it with the team yet, after we've engaged with our towns and parishes, we perhaps just bring a report back to scrutiny to say, how do you think it went? And we record that training session as well, encourage all members to, if they're not able to attend, to look at that as well.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Wakefield, and then I'm going to draw us towards a close.
Thank you. I think it's worth underlining as well that the report sets out, you know, a staged approach to fully adopting the recommendations we're given. We're not going to magically have a programme-led and evidence-based approach from when we launch the sort of first version of the new round. So, you know, whether we do it precisely when Councillor Sanderson suggests or otherwise, I think bound up in this proposal is the idea that we will be further developing this over the months and first few years of a new scheme ahead of us. Anyway, this isn't, you know, a new set of rules to lock down and then, you know, revisit in a few years' time, as has happened previously. So I hope that gives some reassurance as well around timing. And I wonder as well, I'm conscious Councillor Mickelberg raised the observation around the number of applications that we had in the last SIL round that did come to Cabinet that wouldn't have done had we applied a new threshold. And I wonder if it's worth tackling that head on. I think, particularly bearing in mind reflections from colleagues around the table, my reflection about that is that of course, at the end of the day, end of the meeting, we did opt to adopt officer recommendations on all of those points, both between the original scrutiny meeting and the additional called-in meeting, which, in a different world might have been one longer original meeting for reasons we needn't rehearse. There wasn't substantial challenge and debate as to the specific judgments on a lot of those applications, that they weren't complex in terms of how to apply our policy to them. And I think, reflecting back, we would not have lost anything in the last SIL round had the threshold been placed higher, and we would have enabled greater focus on the high value elements, that there weren't lots that were strategic in that round, as we hope to be moving towards in the new process. So I think that's a fair challenge as to how would things have been different, but I suggest we could be quite content with the outcome as applied to them. But of course, most fundamentally, the new policy is designed to support bids coming forward that are compliant with the policy and are more useful to us in, progressing our strategic objectives and the programme that gets produced. So thinking about the new policy with respect to applications that people brought forward under the old one, under the old rules, and without the support and training we're talking about as well, which also came up in scrutiny. I think that's missing the point. So in short, I don't think we should be concerned about that as well. And I'm content with the conclusion I think we've reached.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Are there any other comments? Because if not, then I'm going to wrap up and move to the recommendations. So from the chair, if you'll indulge me, I think that's been really helpful. I wasn't at the meeting, but I did watch it back, and I watched bits of it back multiple times to just make sure I'd understood the nuancing. I think the angst is, given there was some concerns about the last round, people want to be confident that this round does what we think it's going to do and that it's not somehow perverse. I think that would be our angst as well as the scrutiny panel's angst, because we've invested a lot of time and energy. We've had some expert advice. Officers have worked hard on this to bring this forward. We want a policy that does more better. Otherwise, we wouldn't have invested this time. We would have kept what we had. The investing in making sure that those who are applying really understand the process, I think, is key, because whilst there is an element of one chances one's arm a little, actually, if you don't meet the criteria, actually, it's not a good use of your resource to apply for something that you're not going to meet the criteria. So we really do want people to understand what the criteria is and therefore to apply because they can meet it and therefore to be successful. The threshold is an interesting challenge. I think my personal reading of scrutiny was the angst about just being certain that this does what we're expecting. So I think the suggestion that we will go back and report after the next round is really helpful, because I think there's a reflection after each round. If it does something we're not quite expecting, either positive or surprising in a less positive way, what did we learn and what might we do differently having taken that learning on board? And certainly I think the conversations around the training and development and the support and the feedback for applicants, we took very much, I think, from our last discussion around this table when we had a call in. And I think that will be really helpful going forward. So I think we've given that a good test. I understand there is naturally the desire to make sure we've really thought through what Overview and Scrutiny shared with us, because I think it was incredibly thoughtful feedback they provided. Councillor Sanderson, is there anything else you'd like to add, having indulged me from the chair? Because if not, I'm going to move to the recommendations. No,
Chair, I think, as you say, it's been discussed thoroughly, so happy for you to move those recommendations.
So I'm going to ask Cabinet, there are a number of recommendations. Do you wish me to take those on block, or would you prefer me to take those individually? Can I have a show of hands for people who prefer me to take them on block? Okay, that's everybody. So we'll take them on block. Thank you very much. So the recommendations are set out on page 10. There are 6 recommendations in all. I'm not going to read every recommendation, but I will remind you of the beginning of each recommendation. So the first one is to agree the new SIL governance arrangements based on the statement of intent, which is set out in the document. The second is to delegate authority to the Corporate Director of Place and the Chief Planning Officer in consultation with the Executive Council of Planning to develop, publicise and implement the new governance arrangements as soon as practicable. Third is to delegate authority to the Chief Planning Officer to make changes to the documentation required under the recommendations that we've just discussed. The fourth is to agree a suggested increase in the threshold for smaller funding applications from 50,000 to 100,000, with those that are over 100,000 coming to Cabinet. The fifth is the delegating authority to the Corporate Director of Place and Chief Planning Officer in consultation with the Leader and Executive Councillor for Planning for allocation of SIL funding for smaller funding applications requesting 100,000 or less SIL funding, including those for non-parished areas. And the sixth is to delegate authority for the Chief Planning Officer to take forward steps to develop a programme to work more closely with town and parish councils to align local and strategic policies and to develop a more programme-led, evidence-based approach. I've pretty much read the recommendations, even though I said I wasn't going to. Apologies, harder to paraphrase than I expected. Can I have a show of hands in favour of the recommendations? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, colleagues. And thank you very much for that debate. I think that's really important that we had that opportunity. That moves us then on to agenda item 4, which is the corporate performance report for quarter 4. Now, Councillor Ferguson has needed to tender his apologies for this evening, but I'm very grateful that Mr. Morley, as one of the senior officers, has gamely offered to step in and cover the report for us.
Good evening, councillors. So what you have in front of you here is the results of performance over the last 12 months, the first full 12 months of the new corporate plan of the council, demonstrating the progress that has been made against those key actions and the impact it's had on our residents over that period of time. So what you'll recall with the introduction of the new corporate plan, where the principles of do, enable, influence were embedded across all that we try and do within our performance framework. And what you have in front of you here is Appendix 1, which sets the kind of key headline narrative in terms of the contribution that's been made against the 3 key outcomes and the 7, so the 3 key priorities and the 7 outcomes within the corporate plan, but then links each of the key performance metrics to the relevant area, any actions within the corporate plan, but also the 20 key projects, the corporate projects, which are of greater significance, to give you a sense of the full contribution we're making in each of these areas. So that's Appendix 1. Appendix A then looks at the corporate plan actions that I've mentioned already. Appendix B, which is where we tend to spend most of our time, is looking at the performance graphs, largely around the business as usual services and how we're doing in those areas. And then Appendix C is the key corporate projects, as I said earlier, which we have 20. So given it's the end of the year and a significant amount of officer time has gone into this, I did just want to dwell on a few highlights to draw your attention to that. So in terms of the corporate plan actions, 37 of those are on track at the end of year. So if you recall, there is an ambitious number of projects within that area. Only 2 are off track and are behind schedule and unlikely to meet the objective. So strong performance in terms of the overall actions within the corporate plan. In terms of the performance, the operational performance metrics and business as usual activity, 21 of the 28 targets have exceeded their target that was set for them, with 7 within an acceptable variance. And you'll remember that when setting these targets last year, we set an intervention tolerance for each of them, informed by historic data and how we did that. And then in terms of Appendix C and the 20 key projects, corporate projects that we're running, 12 of those are on track and 8 of those are within acceptable tolerances, with none of those being significantly behind schedule. So that's the overall picture. Just to dwell on some of the key performance metrics that I wanted to sort of draw out. PI2, which is about leisure attendances, our One Leisure. I just wanted to note the 126,000 attendance increase on the previous year, a key contribution in terms of improving outcomes for our residents. And whilst we did miss the target by 7,500 in terms of the target that was set, considering this was combined with a full review of the service and a review of the long-term operating model, I think represents really significant progress against that as a key priority. And PI5 and PI6, which are both about performance in revenues and benefits. In terms of PI5, we hit a target of 20.3 days for the processing of new claims. That's 2 days faster than target and 4.1 days faster than the performance last year. And considering that the people applying for these services are some of our most vulnerable residents, and actually that income, it makes a huge difference. Those additional days really are impactful. And just remind that was delivered at the same time as the full review of the council tax support scheme, which was something that was delivered in year. PI7 with homeless preventions, 526 residents were prevented from becoming homeless by the intervention of the housing needs team, a 17% increase on the figures last year. A area of significant pride across the council is PI8 and PI11 and the 703 affordable homes that were delivered within the reporting period. And I am coming to a close, you'll be pleased to hear. PI15, the historic low levels of planning cases that are over 26 weeks old, down to 61. Again, you'll recall that this is a figure that most councils don't routinely publish. And whilst there is no complacency in terms of performance on planning, and we do note that the other two performance indicators slightly narrowly did miss their objectives, there is activity around the planning improvement programme, and that is back on track. And you can see that within the project portfolio. Number of missed bins at a historic low, 11% better than last year. Again, delivered at the same time as the garden waste subscription service was introduced. And finally, before I hand over to Mrs. Sutton on the financial performance, perhaps just worth noting the business rates collection rate of 99.38%, which on a net collectible debt of 65.7 million at year end left only £400,000 worth of debt collected. And at times of straightened times for the public sector, just noting the significant contribution that those teams make to make sure that those core services are funded moving forward is absolutely critical. I'll pass back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morley. I'm going to open it up for comments and questions because the recommendation before us is to note and it's an opportunity to reflect if anybody would like to comment. Councillor Mickelberg and then Councillor Davenport-Ray.
So one of the members made a comment which isn't in the comments from Moving Viewing Scrutiny. I don't know if it's because he was joining remotely and therefore the comments weren't allowed to be in there. But he made the comment that it's very difficult to read our charts when you're colourblind. So he was talking about the red and the green and it was indecipherable to him. We might think about just changing that layout in the future and maybe having dotted lines and dashes or whatever else it might be, just to make the reports more accessible.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harvey contacted me immediately after the meeting and we've already shared that with the team, and the initials are already used as well. It's not just colour, there are, but that is has been updated to be more reflective. But yes, thank you, Councillor Harvey.
So good spot, thank you very much. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
First, I just want to express how happy I am to be able to be part of an organisation that has delivered so many affordable homes in the last year. Before I was elected, this was one of the main things that I felt people in my community were suffering from, being able to get from the temporary housing onto an affordable home. So congratulations to officers on achieving that. And it brings me to Appendix, I think it's C or 3, about the projects, corporate projects we've been working on. And also I'm quite proud that we're so open and transparent about the corporate projects we are and where we're doing well and where we have some improvements to be made. So here we have 20 projects with a status as of March. I'm wondering if we know, now we're in June, have those positions changed, or has the number of corporate projects, I know we'll get a lot more detail in another quarter, but now that we're in a new financial year, has the number of our corporate projects increased or decreased, or what does it look like today?
So we actually, as officers, sat in our delivery board this morning, which is where we review all major projects across the council. And I was pleased to bring a close-down report for the Garden Waste subscription service, which I think illustrates the fact that we always take the opportunities to learn the lessons and take the best practice out of all delivery, but also the dynamic nature of our project environment, which is, local government is a really fast-paced and dynamic environment in which we're constantly closing down reports as they're delivered and meet the objectives and starting new ones. So there is a very, very sort of vibrant a forward plan in terms of the projects that we've got coming forward. It will see an increase in the number of projects that we have, and we'll bring you up to speed on that when we bring those forward in September. I'd like just to reassure you the amount of rigour and diligence that's going into making sure all of those projects are appropriately resourced, and we have the confidence that we can sit here in 12 months' time, giving you that bill of health in terms of the delivery that we've delivered on behalf of the residents across all of those.
Thank you very much. Any more comments or questions? Yep, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. It's on page 102. Portfolio holders, Councillor Pitt. It was something that I do remember. Obviously, we spoke about, and obviously it's in here and it's green. I just would like to sort of understand the outcome of it. Now I'm going to tell you what it is now. So it was item 3, and it was to run a pilot with the new movers to the area, which seeks to support positive outcomes from residents' first arrival in Huntingdonshire. Like a leaflet has been designed, microsite is operational. Small test pilot was run in March with full adoption in all the new council tax bills after the annual billing round. It would be really interesting to sort of see, the effectiveness of it, and signposting, because as it says, signposting residents as a population-wide preventative action. So, I just would like to see a little bit more detail on that, and how it improved, for our residents coming into Huntingdonshire and knowing what we were about and what we can provide them.
So I'll give you a quick summary and then give you the detail you've asked for. So what this pilot does in particular is recognise that the key milestone in someone's life that moving to a new area is. And actually, when you move to an area, all the feedback we've seen is you're less interested in who does what than you are in trying to access the information that is relevant to you, irrespective of provider. So what this WISP pilot does is it includes within your new occupation letter from Council Tax a key form that points to those key services that will support in delivery of the outcomes within the corporate plan. So how do we boost physical activity? So people moving to the area get a free 1-week trial with One Leisure, and we're very confident that those people who take up that trial are likely to join on an enduring basis, but absolutely to support that physical activity, knowing the benefits in terms of quality of life that delivers. We point to skills and employment support, recognising that many people will be in really fulfilling work already, but there might be opportunities to retrain, or for those who aren't, to maximise their economic potential. But we also point to things like volunteering opportunities and links into community groups, knowing that when you move to a new area, establishing a new network, giving something back and establishing a new group of friends are absolutely critical. So that's what that activity's done. In the Oxmoor, we're just about to go live with some door-to-door leaflets in terms of promoting some of that kind of activity as well. And at Scrutiny in September, actually, we'll be bringing back a kind of month-by-month update in terms of the number of click-throughs on those sites, how they've worked. We're constantly reviewing the kind of performance of those areas. But a number of those referrals, Councillor Taylor, absolutely refer into some of the projects elsewhere. So things like the community health prevention pilot activity refers into there. So it's making sure we're channeling people who might benefit to some of those projects, UKSPF and others that we were delivering anyway.
Can't remember whether it was Councillor Wakeford had signalled first, so I think it might be Councillor Pitt first and then Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. Just carrying on from just that last sort of question and response. So I think for me, I really appreciate the entirety of our performance indicators and the value that they bring in terms of having kind of a dashboard to see how the council's getting on. I think within my own portfolio, often the things that are really important, which is largely kind of focused on quality of life, are really hard to measure. So we kind of have proxies to measure them, and this is an example. So I think your challenge is actually really valuable. That actually maybe it's hard to measure how many people have taken that leaflet and done something useful with it. We can't measure that across the whole population or the number of leaflets being delivered, but maybe there is a bit of follow-up to kind of just, speak to a few of them and say, was that useful? Kind of almost like focus group it more rather than, just a sort of a spot survey. That's the comment I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Wakeford?
Councillor Pitt reminds us, that with all the very impressive and hard work reflected in the report and such strong performance metrics, this is only partly capturing all of the actual hard work that happens in the council, and some things are harder to measure than others. Councillor Davenport-Ray beat me to quoting 703 affordable homes last year, but I will re-quote it because I think as a high watermark for this council, that is extremely important to clearly residents hunting for homes, seeking affordable homes. There are never enough, but that is a significant achievement. The downside with setting such a high watermark, of course, is it makes it all the more challenging subsequently. And I think we do need to recognise that because the housing development world is not purely linear and is cyclical for all sorts of reasons. Colleagues will appreciate that there will always be variance as we go up and down. So I'm managing expectations, colleagues, for a third record year in a row being possibly a step beyond even this administration at the council. But I do also want to echo Councillor Davenport-Ray's thanks and congratulations to the team, as indeed to all the teams Mr. Morley name check for us, and there are many more that time doesn't allow us to run through. I just want to touch on a specific observation which I'm sure did come up at scrutiny, and unless I'm mixing my reports or misreading, I'm not sure is picked up in the numbering either, which was it Councillor Martin from memory, offering an observation around how challenging our targets are. I'm not mixing agenda items, am I? Councillor Comboy, checking the agenda in case that was revisited later. And it was again on its face a perfectly reasonable challenge, as we all know that we have a massive housing challenge in our district and our country. Why aren't we targeting ever higher? Why aren't we seeking to target true need immediately, for example? And clearly our ambitions aren't limited by the targets that we're setting ourselves. But I think for these metrics to be useful to us, we want them to be challenging for reasons Councillor Ferguson would remind us were he here, and as we've discussed before, it's not useful to us if we have metrics where everything's green and we meet them the whole time. But equally, it's important that they're realistic as well, that they're developed within the context of the regulatory and funding and legal system that we are currently operating in. And so in terms of our housing targets, and we are reflecting anticipated challenges to not target for a third record year next year. I think setting a target that is realistic in the context we're working in has to be most useful. There is much more we could say about need for affordable housing, but I will stop there.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Taylor, and I'm going to draw us to a close. Oh no, I'm calling. Do you know? I'm obviously having one of those evenings this evening. Councillor Wakeford. I've called you 3 different names, and you are definitely Councillor Wakeford. I apologise. Councillor Taylor, because I'm now reading your name tag.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to pick up on targets, I think we must be very careful not to. Yeah, if we set our targets too high, it has a human cost. I've said this before, that it has an impact negatively on our staff's ability to do that job. We have to be realistic. And when our staff do hit those targets, they need to be applauded and they need to be, congratulated for hitting those targets. And if they don't hit them, there's another day. It's not the end of the world. And the true test of our targets are our residents, because they are the ones, if we're doing something wrong, they will come to us and they will say, you are not doing this right, please look at this. And they are the true testament of whether our organisation is working. That's my view on targets.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. I'm now slightly paranoid about getting everybody's names wrong, but poor Councillor Wakeford really has suffered tremendously this evening. Councillor Ferguson might be more offended than you. Can I say from the chair that I think one of our real challenges, it is that thing that actually when you have fantastic performance, there is a temptation to think that maybe actually we've made life easy for ourselves and for our organisation. I am absolutely clear from the discussion that each of us has as portfolio leads and with our officer team that actually none of these targets have been easy reach targets. They have all been challenging targets. They have been met because they are realistic, but they are achievable with the right work and the right resource and the right effort. The teams should rightly be congratulated for the work that they've achieved. And those near misses doesn't mean failure. It means it's a near miss and we continue to work. And there's often very good reasons why it's a near miss. Sometimes we don't always have the resource at the right time. Sometimes there are other factors that are not always within our gift. But I really would like to put on record on behalf of all of us that our thanks to all of the teams for all of their hard work and to all of the officers who are busy supporting those teams, but it's everybody in this organisation, top to bottom, bottom to top, and the role that they play. Because without their hard work, we wouldn't be sitting here with a corporate report that looks as it does. I know there will be challenges, inevitably, quite rightly, to check that we are stretching ourselves for the future years. I think the more we can do to explain why targets need to flex, why sometimes they go down as well as up, is really important. But I also would like to get a culture where we also recognise where there is overperformance, because sometimes meeting a target is perfectly acceptable and that's good value for money, and actually we don't need overperformance. There are times when as an organisation we are overperforming, that is adding value, and we should be recognising that. So I just leave that as a thought, because I'm going to continue to mention the colour purple for overachievement, but I really relish the opportunity to be able to thank those parts of our organisation which are going above and beyond. And the Revs and Bens example, I think, is one that we should note, not to single them out over the other teams, but that sort of percentage in terms of income achieved is remarkable. That's the only word for it. So you had before you the recommendations to consider, to comment, and to think about the reports. Are you content that we have done that? And are you content, therefore, that we are then ready to move on to the next item? Yep. Okay. In which case, thank you very much, Mr. Morley, for stepping into the breach. Can we move on to the financial performance report, again for Q2 of last year? And I think this is Mrs. Sutton coming to join us this time. And I'll try and get your name correct. And Councillor Mickelberg, are you going to kick us off on this?
Only if I get her name right. I'm delighted I have the subject matter experts with me. It means that I don't need to recall the nth degree detail of another excellent financial report that puts HDC in a good light. So I'll hand across to Mrs. Sutton. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. We're bringing to you this evening the full year outturn report for 2023-24. And the figures in this are consistent with the draft financial statements that we published at the end of May. I am going to plug finance on this. Our draft statements were published by the statutory deadline of 31st of May, which is an improvement on last year when we were delayed by audit matters. But also, we were one of only 2 district councils in Cambridgeshire that managed to meet that deadline. So I do want to congratulate the finance team for doing that. So thank you for allowing me to do that. The figures, as I said, are for the full year last year. They are slightly better than we were forecasting in the Q3 forecast, predominantly due to, again, higher financial interest. We came in with an underspend against budget of 1.7 million. However, our expenditure net expenditure at 22.3 million was still 1.4 million higher than the previous year. So we are still seeing inflationary factors coming through in our costs. The underspend, as I said, was due to unexpected financial interest income. The interest rates remained higher than we expected in the year. But I have to stress, this is a short-term boost to our finances. It's not something we can rely upon in the longer term. What we were able to do in the year was to expense the implementation costs of our garden waste service. We'd originally planned not to expense those until 23-24 when the increased income started coming through. But as we had the underspend last year, we were able to expense those then. So we will see the full benefit of the new garden waste subscription in the current financial year. My colleague, Councillor Morley, has stolen my thunder on the NNDR collection rates. However, he didn't mention our council tax collection rates, which disappointingly were very, very, very slightly lower than last year at 0.06%. However, we were joint third across Cambridgeshire, with only Cambridgeshire City and South Cambs District Council achieving higher rates than us. And they have more generous council tax support schemes. So I can see why their figures were only slightly better than ours. But of course, we have our new council tax support scheme this year. So I will be eagerly looking at the reports next year to see how we've done. Just to touch on capital, we continue to be slow on spending our capital, with nearly 19 million carried forward to next year. That's due to predominantly external factors, some of it being additional legislation on the Hinchinbrook Country Park, and some of it being contractor timelines around the Market Towns programme, which is, a very large, very impressive project, but equally is very complex as well. I have to put my Section 151 hat on now. As I said, we underspent last year. It is only a short-term underspend, and we still have to remember our long-term security. So we have to continue to demonstrate effective long-term financial control. Please don't see the underspends and think that we can go off and spend it as we wish. It's no good depleting our revenue reserves now and then having to go and borrow in the future when interest rates will still be high, and whereas we're benefiting from them at the moment because we are in receipt of interest, if we have to go out and borrow funds, then those rates will be at a higher cost to us. We know we have the general election coming up. We know that there is no additional funding coming through on any of those, and there's likely to be significant change coming through. So I am preaching caution here. At a future overview and scrutiny report, we will be bringing through our productivity plans, and that is something we've been asked to do by central government to explain to them how we're going to make our funds and our reserves go further in the future. So there's clear signalling coming out that you know, we are responsible for our own financial sustainability going forwards. So I ask that you heed that. Any questions?
Can I cheekily ask one from the chair? Can I just ask for clarity? You said a note of caution as the 151 officer. Can you just remind us about the challenges ahead? Because I know you've been very clear about those previously, about our medium-term financial strategy and the challenges that we still have within that.
Certainly. So you recall our MTFS predicts a surplus in years 1 and 2, but years 3 onwards we drop into a deficit, and in year 3 that deficit is 2.2 million. We know that there are likely to be additional minimum pay award costs coming through in the future, and that puts significant pressure, not just on a single year in our MTFS, but it will be an ongoing pressure every year. And just very briefly, every 1% increase in our pay bill is an extra £250,000 cost per year. So that would have put 1.25 million pressure onto our MTFS. In addition, we can see that a number of councils are already declaring Section 114s. That trend is likely to continue. Reading through the government financial press, really exciting stuff. Additional Section 114s are expected to be declared after the election. And it's very clear when you start reading through the stories that Oflog and public interest columns are reporting on financial sustainability not being taken seriously by councils and being too optimistic in their investment approaches and paybacks.
Thank you, and sorry, because Councillor Mickelberg, you were indicating to come in, so sorry, as portfolio holder, I cheekily got a question in.
No, I was just going to cover off the points from overview and scrutiny, that was all. Councillor Jennings, Sharon and myself had met prior to overview and scrutiny to answer and run through the statements of the documents with Councillor Jennings, and he was able to ask a lot of questions there, which then meant that overview and scrutiny wasn't bogged down with lots of very accounting style questions. He asked a question, however, on the evening, which was talking about our audit fees and the fact that those were significantly higher than were expected. Again, that's covered off in the minute or the overview and scrutiny comments. In essence, I think we've expressed our displeasure at the accountants as to how they were billing us and the size of that overrun. And they have been asked to be mindful of value for money next year when this happens. There was also a question just about One Leisure. There was an unexpected blip in costs, which we didn't know the answer off the top of our heads, but it turned out to be something down to utility costs and the way they had been run due to some problems with the building management system over the course of a couple of months, which had caused a bit of a spike within that. Other than that, overview and scrutiny was very tame with their questioning of us.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from Cabinet? Any observations? Councillor Pitt.
So I think probably something I'm sure I'm preaching to converted in the room here, but just to, for the people who may be watching, I think public sector organisations and councils in particular spend so much of their time on the brink of catastrophe financially that it kind of becomes normalised and even expected, and that doesn't make it okay. It's not a good. No organisation wants to be living hand to mouth, and so the flip side of that is actually if we're in a strong position financially, a robust position, that there could be an accusation actually we're kind of hoovering up money and holding on to it, and I think. Our Section 151 officers, painted a really clear picture. Actually, take the long-term view, and actually, we have a fair bit of jeopardy still built into our MTFS. But yeah, fundamentally, it's our responsibility. We're not keeping money in, we're not trying to build up a strong position for the sake of the council's own benefit. If we do end up serving a 114 notice, it's the residents that will suffer. It's this non-statutory services like are really important program, keeping people out of crisis and helping people in crisis. A lot of that work is a non-statutory work, but for me, it's absolutely fundamental for what we're here for. So I think, the hard decisions we've made over the last couple of years put us in a position where we can be confident going forwards and actually delivering for our residents. So I'm sure that everyone, on the cabinet agrees that we're doing the right things, making the right decisions. But I think, there's a really robust argument behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Does anybody else wish to comment? Councillor Wakeford, go on, because then I can call you the wrong name again. No, you're really not under pressure to comment. I was going to call you Mrs. Sutton, just because then I could say that I'd called you every name so far. In which case, may I, from the chair, say that Councillor Pitt, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think one of the real challenges is, we are custodians of this council, and it's our duty to make sure that we have good financial stewardship during our term of office, and that actually the administration which comes after us, as much as we might like it all to be us again, it may be a different administration, we have a responsibility to make sure that's in a sound position to continue to deliver on behalf of residents. I think it's that long-term view, which is some councils are finding that they simply are just not in that position. For whatever reason, they are in that short-termist, if we get to the end of next month, we'll have done well. I don't think we can be complacent, but I do agree with you. I think it's because we have made some hard decisions. I also know that we've asked a great deal of our staff in terms of the savings that we've asked them to make. And I know that in the productivity plan, we are continuing to be incredibly challenging of our teams to say, how can we work smarter? How can we make our resources go as far as possible? So I hear very loudly and clearly, which is why I wanted the clarity that, whilst it may look comfortable now, we are certainly not in a long-term comfortable position, and we still will potentially find ourselves having to find ways of making more efficiencies and continuing to stretch that money as far as possible. That does mean we have to continue to be really savvy on behalf of our residents so that we can continue to be here to serve them as fully as possible. So it's a challenging time ahead, but I'm pleased at least that, unlike other authorities that are in that really awful position of being on the verge of bankruptcy, that we're not there, but some of those decisions have been tough. I won't argue with that. I'm going to call you the right name now. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, Chair. As I said earlier, but possibly off mic, I have been called worse, so it's all good. I think there is a counter-argument, a claim that could be made that the very reference to 114 notices is somehow, inherently deliberately frightening and shroud waving and so on, because clearly, as we're all acknowledging, and is apparent from the reports, we are not on that brink, all too common for other authorities, as Councillor Pitt has reminded us of. But I really would sort of scotch that in advance, because as Ms Sutton's made clear to us, it is that there is no room for complacency here, and as I say, I would defend the reflection on that as a risk, which we're reminded that the reality of by all too many councils, and we fear more to come in advance of next year's budget cycle. So I remain not delighted that we've had to make some of the decisions that we've made, but I remain proud that we have felt able to do so, and confident that they were the right decisions for the benefit of our residents, again, as Councillor Pitt rightly reminds us.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. And for those watching online, I apologise, where the lights naturally dimmed in our energy saving, the cameras actually then also turned themselves off briefly. They've reactivated again now, so hopefully you can see us again on camera. Thank you very much, Councillor Wakeford. We have given that the in line with the recommendations we've considered and commented. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that anybody is keen that we do? Because in which case I'm going to thank Councillor Mickelberger and Mrs Sutton. Thank you very much. Is this your last time with us? Because I think we must be getting pretty close. In which case, I know we've thanked you publicly at full council, but can I thank you again for your hard work and your commitment? I know that you are potentially coming back for one of our last sessions looking at next year's budget to make sure that we don't forget the warnings that you've reminded us about being prudent. And I think the answer is we've heard those loudly and clearly, but can I thank you very much for your dedication to this organisation, and on a personal level, thank you on behalf of Cabinet. You've steered us through some quite challenging stuff. You've been fantastically robust and endlessly patient with us. Thank you very much. In which case then, can I move us on to Treasury Management? So this then takes us through where we are with the investments and the work that we've been doing around those. And I know Oliver's come to join us now for this. So is this Councillor Mickelberg introducing, or am I handing back across? Oliver, over to you.
Introduction free, excellent. Evening. What I'm bringing to you tonight is the final report for Treasury Management for the year. So we had the strategy, we had the half-year report, and now we've got the full year report. So this rounds up everything that's happened during the year. So there's a few themes that I wanted to pull out, one of which was interest rates. They're higher than we expected for longer. So that's helped us with some interest earned during the year. But if I can just stray into the future, we're looking at the rates going down. Our Treasury advisors suggest in September, although it could be as soon as this week. I think there's a meeting this week. And they will drop down, they're predicting to 4%. At the moment, they're slightly over 5% by the end of the financial year. And by the time we get to September next year, they're likely to be down to 3%, which is probably what they're going to stay at for the future. That's what they're predicting. There's a bit of a health warning with that because we've got quite a bit of money with the DMO at the moment, and we're not sure what is going to happen to those rates because they don't necessarily follow the market rate, so they could drop sooner or quicker than the other rates. So again, back to how much interest we're going to earn this year is slightly more uncertain than it was obviously last year. The next theme is the economics. Inflation has been higher again for longer than we were expecting, so that's what's influenced the interest rates staying high for longer. And the third thing was borrowing, which we just spoke about. We haven't borrowed anything in the last financial year. We didn't borrow anything short term either, so our borrowing is lower than what it was at the beginning because we paid off a loan that was relating to Cambridge Regional College and Huntingdon Gym, so they've both been paid off. And the final thing I wanted to mention was something that Overview and Scrutiny had brought up, which was training. They're interested in having training at the moment. We're just trying to organise dates for that. That will be provided by Link, the Treasury advisors. So that was the last thing I wanted to say. So if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Councillor Mickelberg? Are you going to do Overview and Scrutiny? Thank you.
Yeah, just to pick up on the main point was from Councillor Blackwell, just asking around elements of the commercial investment property portfolio and the fact that actually it been down this year was last year, the year just completed. Actually, our receipts were lower than expected. And it was mainly due to the fact that the property in Fareham was being refurbished. And as a result, it was empty. We weren't receiving any rental on that. There's also then some questions just around the fact that it looks notionally as if the loan was higher than the value of the property, and that was just an accounting quirk due to the way that the book price is logged into the balance sheet. That was one of the reasons why our auditors had been delaying, because they were questioning how we had the value that we had come to, and therefore because the book value is set by the rental that you're receiving. If you're not receiving any rental, your book value goes down, and therefore the numbers just look out of kilter for a period of time. The only time actually the cost or the gap between the loans and the value of the property matters is at the point that you come to sell it. And we're fairly confident that actually the commercial sale value of the property is way in excess of any of the borrowings that we have in order to have financed it.
Thank you. It's really helpful clarity. Are there any comments or observation? Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you. It's not totally regarding the Treasury, but it's something that will affect our commercial units. And I think my worry is any units that are left empty and they degrade by, just being left empty. As you see, any building that's not being used, eventually they will start to look shabby. Do we have a procedure to make sure that our commercial units are being looked after when not being used?
So we appoint agents to attempt to let our units, as any commercial property portfolio holder will. Generally, the people viewing would look past that because they would have very specific ideas about what it is that they'd want to be doing. So if you were a car repair shop and you're looking at something that was previously a bouncy castle hire place, actually it doesn't really matter to you because you're going to come in, you're going to make the changes yourself. Actually what you want to be sure of is that the basics, things like the electrics are in good order and the water and so on as well, it's connected, and the basic utilities are sound. So those sorts of things are kept an eye on. Sometimes we get vandalism, sometimes we get attempts on empty commercial properties. But again, the agents check these for us. We have ops check some of our empty sites as well to make sure that that they are in good order. But generally, it's more important that the potential tenant sees the potential that they're looking at, rather than us spending money on things which they then actually will then just disregard because that's not what they require for the unit.
Councillor Taylor?
Chair, if I can come back on that. Do we have confidence in our agents that they are doing this job? It's all well and good putting agents in there, but are we actually looking at whether they're doing their jobs?
So the agents, the performance of the agents is managed all of the time. The officers in charge of that does a very good job of doing so. It sets a very, very high standard of them, it must be said. And we have been at the point of reviewing and looking to replace agents along the performance lines. So you might want to come in with exactly that comment, because we obviously don't want to say too much because you have certain elements of commercial contractual constraint within that, but
yeah, as well as having the agents visiting, we do have other security measures in place, which it's a public meeting, so I don't really want to describe those here, but we do take other actions. And those commercial units within the district, we do where we can go round on a regular basis and inspect them ourselves and pick up if there's any issues with them.
Thank you. Councillor Davenport-Ray?
Thank you, Chair. Oliver, I'm going to check in as usual on ESG investing. Very pleased to see in the report that you found 2 funds that look promising that we might be able to explore once counterparty rates start to fall. But ESG, I'm specifically interested in the S this time around, the social. And as an organization, we're interested in improving the quality of life of people who live here. And that might lend itself to how we invest our funds in a way that benefit the people that live in Huntingdonshire. And so It isn't something really we've reported on in the past, but I noticed in the last financial year, the council had net investing of over £32 million. I'm wondering in the future whether we might be able to dig down into how much of that investing was invested in a way that helped our community build wealth and helped build the wealth of local people. And so perhaps this is a question, I'm giving you advance warning of a question, perhaps in a year's time that I might ask on that, and how feasible you think that might be.
Yeah, I'm glad you've given me a year to think about it. Right, yes, I'll think about it. We know that we use some of our money for investing anyway in the capital programme, so I suppose that's where it really ends up. So a lot of what the money that we're investing at the moment is what might be used in the future to do something probably within this area. So yeah, I'll give it a bit of thought and find out how I can work that one out for you.
Mrs. Sutton?
Without wishing to stitch up some of my colleagues as I am departing, but this is something which I would expect to see as part of the commercial investment strategy, rather than it just being purely for commercial gain, but looking at how we can take those receipts back into the district and deliver greater ones for the benefit of our residents, and and not just focusing purely on the financial return on that immediate investment, but looking at the wider benefits of making that investment.
You can't say you don't get due notice. And knowing Councillor Davenport-Ray, she won't forget either. Are there any more comments or questions? Because if not, then I'm going to bring this item to a close. Can I thank you very much? Very much duly noted the work that we're doing and the challenges that we may still have ahead of us, but thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to see a strong performance in all of the reporting on this particular topic, so thank you. In which case, can I move us on then to Hinchinbrook Country Park Joint Group? We have a report really to note, but I know that Councillor Taylor, this is normally your area. Is there anything you particularly wished to draw our attention to?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just quickly, I won't go on forever. So yeah, the group heard, it's all in the report, so I'm sure you've read it. The group heard that the park had a very successful winter for completion of the works, that I think they were very pleased. The wardens and all the volunteers managed to get everything they needed to do done over winter. Sometimes winter does put pay to certain things that you need to do outside. The weather over the winter had also restricted, though, the park, some of the park groups, most notably was the weekly park run. And I think the weather affected the weekly park run pretty much all the way through Britain. I certainly realised that I hadn't been running for at least 5 weeks, but I didn't really worry about that too much. But and I should imagine Councillor Auburn as well was slightly frustrated not being able to do his park run, but I'm sure he's there now doing it every Saturday. The bee orchards had increased at Sutley Meadow site. We hear about the bee orchards pretty regular at Sutley Meadows. I haven't yet seen them. I've seen photos of them. The training had taken place to identification of bee orchards to allow for assistant rangers and the ecologists to assist in future surveys. So that's really good. So it won't all be down to sort of the rangers themselves to do it. Investment project required surveys were being carried out between spring and summer. This will allow for resubmission of the planning application later in the year, so that's really good news. Finance parks forecasted running costs were static from the previous years, and income for Countryside Centre was back to pre-pandemic levels. So that's it. There was lots more in there, but I just thought I'd pick out those bits. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Have you got any comments or questions? Councillor Davenport-Ray?
Thank you, Chair. 2 weeks ago, I was very privileged to attend the 5th graduation ceremony of our groundwork schemes, this time at Hinchinbrook Country Park. And I just wanted to put on record my thanks to all of the staff involved in that project. It's wonderful to see so many different themes coming together. Environmentalism, biodiversity, job creation, learning new skills, helping people who are unemployed, and all right on our own site to create a dipping pond that will be accessible by so many. So just well done to everyone involved in that process.
Hear, hear. Thank you. Then if there's no more on this particular item, we move to item 8. Now this is where I'm going to read out the statement that will mean that we end the meeting for the public, because this is the exclusion of the press and public. So it will be resolved that the press and public be excluded from the meeting because the business to be transacted contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. So on that note, I'm going to bid good night to those people who've joined us online. Thank you for spending some time with us. It's Hupp Estate, and we'll move into the last item on tonight's agenda.
That is a formal decision, so
Ah,
it's good to have
okay, we will then vote for